Cemetery, and particularly infant and neonatal burials. She's published on this. So I think it was an extremely good thing that she was able to be part of the dig at St Patrick's Chapel, which again is a site that's, you know, had attention in the past. And what I think the recent work has shown is that, you know, how much revisiting these sites that we think are perhaps ruined by earlier antiquarian digging, or as Douglas Haig put it there, the innocent plying of tiny spades. And a great deal has come out of this excavation. So we're going to end now on with Marion, and her talk is entitled Kiss Graves and Engine Blocks, Excavations at St Patrick's Chapel, White Sands Bay.
Thanks, Heather. Yes, they have actually let me out to dig again this year, which I spent most of my time at my desk. I was really grateful for it, and we did have fantastic weather. So I'll just situate the site to begin with. Presumably that moves the slides on. I'm sure most of you know, but in case anybody doesn't, that St Patrick's Chapel is in the parish of St David's, and it occupies a narrow strip of rough ground. You can just see, just the pointer works, that's the location of the site there. Obviously we're here in Haverfordwest, and anyone who doesn't know, that's where we are. It occupies a narrow strip of rough ground just to the north of White Sands Bay car park, which is here, so the site is actually in that little area there. And it's first mentioned by George Owen in about 1600 with this lovely quote here: "Not far off from Capelstinian is Capel Patrick, full west of St David's, and placed as near as his country, namely Ireland, as it could well be. It is now wholly decayed." So by 1600, it wasn't there anymore. The first excavation on the site, sorry, hang on, I will get the hang of this image. You never guess that I work with computers for a living, which previous, there we are. Okay. Right, the first excavation on the site was by Mr. Badger, fantastic name, and Mr. Green in 1924. And this revealed the walls of a stone-built chapel. You can see them here. Approximately 9 metres east-west and just over 3 to the north-south internally. And they found 2 well-preserved male skeletons, including this chap here, who they described as the bones of a youthful male. And he was aligned east-west in front of the altar. They also found 2 complete and 1 fragmentary adult skulls, and what were described as the bones of quite young children. And these were all inside the chapel itself. They didn't do any excavation outside the walls. No dating evidence was recovered. Obviously in those days we weren't doing carbon-14 dating, so although today that would be dating evidence, it wasn't then. Without the dating evidence, the date of the stone-built chapel was still thought later medieval, and that's not something that we've changed today. It's not known when erosion started to affect the site, but it was active at the time of the 1924 excavation, and a comparison with the first edition Ordnance Survey map of 1888 and modern maps indicates quite a considerable loss of land over the 125 years between the mapping. There's anecdotal evidence of burials being exposed for several decades. By the 1970s, erosion was so severe that Douglas Haig of the Royal Commission undertook a small-scale excavation, which recovered another 5 skeletons, one of which was aligned north-south, and 2 that we know were buried on an east-west axis in long-kissed graves. Interestingly, this stone was found to have been used as a lintel slab on one of those kissed burials, and was interpreted as the reuse of a rude headstone on which was scratched an early cross. You can't see the cross on the photograph, so you'll have to take my word for it. In fact, I'm going to have to take Douglas Haig's word for it that it's there. I think Ken Murphy's seen it. I think it's in the Royal Commission archive, but I actually can't see a cross on that stone at all. But it's apparently there. So during the severe storms of this winter, which we heard about at the beginning from Phil, and I'm sure, as he said, you all remember, the large boulders that were protecting the site from the sea were washed away twice. Burials were being lost to the sea, and so in February, 3 burials were removed during rescue work by, I believe, by Jim and Pete. Obviously then, the remaining burials in the dune face were still at great risk, and so DAT were engaged to undertake a larger rescue excavation on some of whom provided the most excellent cake I've ever had on a dig. One of them, a couple are in the audience, and I'm really very grateful. So we undertook a magnetometry survey in April on the chapel site, which is here, and in the fields around. But it was quite disappointing. We were hoping to detect a boundary to the chapel and the cemetery, and perhaps see some other features, but the results were, quite disappointing. Apart from the walls of the chapel, nothing of significance was detected. We carried on. We went and did the excavation. It took place over 2 gloriously sunny weeks in early May, apart from the last day when it rained and rained and rained. And I know I'm not alone, because I was speaking to one of the excavators, the volunteers at lunchtime. I'm not alone in the fact that I was almost in tears by 11 o'clock on the day we were backfilling, trying to shovel wet sand which had doubled in weight uphill. And if Babs hadn't rung her husband and asked him to come with his Manitou machine and help us, I don't think I would have just put my shovel down and left in tears, because it was awful. But the 2 days we were excavating, it was fantastic, and we were excavating in wind-blown sand. Everything was within wind-blown sand. So we excavated 4 trenches, hand excavated, because the chapel walls were very near the surface, and I don't think we'd been allowed to take a digger on there anyway. You wouldn't want to. The archaeology in Trench 1, which was the big trench along the face of the dune, that was the most complex. So I'm going to talk about that right at the end, and start with Trench 2, which is this little one coming back here, coming offset from Trench 1, and it comes across the west wall of the chapel. So it ran west and across the west wall of the chapel. And we found the wall. As you can see, it's just below the surface of the grass there. Literally came straight down onto it when we'd taken the turfs off. It was found to be 74 centimetres wide, and there it survived to a height of 1.28 metres, 1 metre 28 centimetres. To this side of it, to the east side of it, it was full of rubble in the interior, and we think this is the backfill from the 1924 excavation. The wall itself was constructed from beach boulders and large slabs of quarried slate or shale, with no obvious bonding material. It was randomly coursed, although some of the slabs did form rough bands, you can see there and there. Yes, and I say the backfill from the 1924 excavation lay to the east of the wall, and I know it was chucked in quite randomly, and I know because I was the person who lifted all those stones out again and threw them over to the side, and ended up with this. And my Facebook profile picture is a picture of me bending down in that ditch. And when I went in that trench, and when I put it out there, one of my friends said to me, "Did you find anything?" I'm not joking. So apart from that, we had to the west, they banded wind-blown sand, and in the bottom of the trench there was a compacted, stony, sandy, silty layer. We had 5 sherds of medieval or post-medieval pottery out of the trench, but a clay pigeon and other modern artefacts were evidence of disturbance to the east, over to the other side of the wall. So that was Trench 2. In fact, you can see it in the section here. There's the chapel wall. That's the backfill from the 1920s excavation. Over there, just above where it says Trench 2, you can see the little lines in the section drawing, and those are the stony, silty layer. This is going to start working again, because I really need it. Right, so Trench 3 ran across and to the north of the north wall of the chapel. We were hoping to assess the condition of the wall with all these trenches and evaluate the potential for other archaeological deposits and features. The wall here was about the same width as in Trench 2, but it was only 1 metre high that it survived. Same sort of construction, again no obvious bonding material. And there was a 38 centimetre wide offset foundation on the inside and also on the outside of the wall. So backfill again from the 1924 excavation lay inside the wall, and to the north, immediately below the topsoil, in the centre of the trench, just out here on the section drawing, there was a modern deposit of black soil, boulders, concrete and some asbestos, and close to the wall a deposit of rubble and slate roofing tile. So we think the deposit was wind-blown sand beneath these deposits, up here, and that had all accumulated against the chapel wall. Again, we had a single sherd of medieval pottery. Soil had built up against the wall, but it faded to the north, and below it, a group of stones was probably the top of a kissed grave out here. To the north of the soil was a definite kissed grave with a poorly preserved skeleton, but these two graves were left in situ, as was this lovely layer of rounded white quartz pebbles and slate fragments, and a revetment wall against which, see that there, against which the quartzy shale layer abutted. This revetment wall might have delimited the extent of the chapel yard. Sand then lay to the north of the revetment wall and also below it, and at the northern end of the trench, humic and dark grey bands evident in the sand led to the suspicion that that's a fairly recent accumulation. And then it does say in the interim report, although there were no artefacts or other features to support this suspicion, and there was actually one. It caused quite alarm when we first discovered it, but the poor chap who found it, some bones in a sleeping bag. And they, quite a modern, I say quite modern, sort of kind of sleeping bag from the early 1980s, those ones that had no shape to them, that sort of quilted thing with zip up the side, and there were these bones in it, but they turned out to be the bones of a dog. And it was in the area where there was campfires and things, so you can imagine sort of people camping on the beach, and the dog's died. So they put it in the sleeping bag and they buried it. Can you imagine when we found it, we're going to have to call the police? But it was a dog, so well, not the dog. Okay, so that was trench 3. And then trench 4 ran across and to the south of the south wall of the chapel. Again, looking to assess the condition and look for other deposits there. Again, the wall was about the same width, 70 centimetres wide, as on the rest of the site. We didn't expose the rest of it down to floor level. Sand had accumulated against it to the south. And below that sand, again, there was a band of rounded quartz stones, angular stones, and fragments of slate, which may be the path associated with the chapel to the south. And to the south of that was a deposit of beach boulders, but these layers were not excavated. A dry stone wall, which you can see just down there and on the plan down, actually that's a bit fuzzy, sorry. So there was a dry stone wall about 7 metres from the south wall of the chapel, and that was resting on an old sandy soil and could be a wall delimiting the extent of the yard around the chapel. And there was a rusty brown coloured soil that had developed against the south side of that. So that's the easy bit really, the easy trenches. Then we have trench 1, and the stratigraphy in trench 1 really allows us to understand the development of this site over time. It's best understood by looking at this section drawing. So starting at the bottom, going back in time, the pointer isn't working yet. Right, layer 41 there is above it. There's likely to be an old ground surface present below all of this, but the excavation was not deep enough to find it. So following an initial accumulation of sand over that ground surface, there was a period of stability during which layer 41, this black charcoal-rich soil had formed on the site. Now, after about 30 centimetres of sand had accumulated over that soil, this wall, which you see here, these stones in the section drawing, represent a wall. It was slightly curved, and it ran parallel to the eastern edge of the trench. It measured 8 metres long from north to south, and at its southern and northern ends turned at right angles eastwards went into the section. It was about a metre wide, and at its southern end it stood about 6 courses high, but on an average it was 2 to 3 courses high, about half a metre, but at the southern end it was about a metre high. It was a dry stone construction again of beach boulders, but the largest one measured 90 by 60 by 60 centimetres. It was a massive boulder, you can see it there on the drawing. Opposite that was another large boulder, and we think that these formed an entrance to the building, and that possibly those 2 stones inside may have been deliberately placed to block the entrance. So the right angle turns at the south and north end of that wall suggest that it was a building or enclosure of some kind, and it might have had an internal dimension of perhaps 6 metres or so, 6 square metres, and that wall was left in situ. the end of the excavation. So after that, sand continued to accumulate around that wall to a depth of about 30 centimetres, and thin soil developed over that. Tumble from the wall was resting on that soil and on sand in areas where the soil wasn't present. And we had a limpet shell midden, which is on the next slide. A limpet shell midden had lay to the east of that wall, within what would have been the building or the enclosure. And in this trench, then we've got to just refer to, although it's come out a bit small. So within trench 1 here, we excavated 20 graves. And together with the 3 that were recovered during February's work, that means that we have the graves of 10 definite and 4 probable adults, 1 definite and 3 probable children, 2 definite and 2 probable infants recovered this year from the site. 9 of the burials, oh yeah, that's the plan again, I'm just looking at trench 1. 9 of the burials were straight into sand, like this one, in simple dug graves. And then there were 3 partial kists, like this one here, so which I've just got a little bit of a kist. So I suppose some of that could be lost, but there were 3 partial kists. And interestingly, in this one, you see that little area of white just at the sort of junction of the clavicles above the breastbone. That's a white quartz disc, about 4 or 5 centimetres in diameter and about a centimetre thick, and it's obviously been carefully placed over the, in this part of the throat area. It doesn't seem to have been hung unless it was in some sort of organic bag, perhaps it's rotted away, but we didn't find any evidence for it being sort of hung around the neck, but it may have just been carefully placed over the throat there on that person. That was the only such quartz disc that was found there. The other 9 burials then were in what we call lintel graves. This is the same grave, this is Kist 23, before the lintel slabs were taken off and after complete excavation. And I don't know if you know sort of something about the soils of Wales. It's really incredibly rare to have burials of this date surviving with this level of preservation, because the acidic soils across most of the country mean the bone from this period doesn't survive, and it's the fact that they're in the sand that means that we've got this really incredible skeletal preservation on the site. If you look at this one very closely, you can see the hands are sort of folded across the body like that, and the feet are very, very tightly close together. And I always think this is indicative of shroud burial, of somebody having been wrapped up, quite tightly shrouded and placed in the grave. And I'll say a little bit more about that later on. And then the two of the probable infant burials, and this is after excavation. We actually don't seem to have a photo of this before it was excavated, but prior to excavation there was a lintel slab over the top, in sort of centrally placed over that little grave, and these 20 white quartz stones were carefully arranged around the outside of the slab. And there's another one in the section which we didn't excavate, which again had that sort of arrangement of white quartz pebbles on it. And this association with white quartz pebbles and burials of this date is it's been recorded at other sites in Wales and beyond. At Capel Mylog in Powys, there was a particularly elaborate early medieval grave that had a scatter of white quartz stones in with it. At Kellington Church in Yorkshire, there were lots of white quartz pebbles placed within the graves, and at Whitthorn Priory in Scotland, there were lots of white quartz pebbles and cattle teeth in with every grave. And nobody knows what the significance of this practice was. I think it's really interesting that we've got that white quartz sort of surface on the north side of the cemetery as well. We don't know the origin of the association or the significance of the white quartz pebbles in association with graves, but there was a decree from the Bishop of Winchester in 1384 condemning what he called stone castings in cemeteries, and that possibly may refer to this practice. So, I know I'm on last now after Jim said we haven't found anything earlier than some of the cemetery sites around here. Oh, sorry, that's, yes, right, here we are. So, some of these burials, as you can see from this one, were cut into the wall. This is the wall, and this is a burial that's been cut into it. Some were also cut into the sand above the wall, and it was clear that most of the graves post-dated that wall, which is quite interesting. Some of them also, it was clear, were dug when the wall may no longer have been visible. So mostly though, the relationship between the wall and the graves wasn't always certain. We just couldn't tell with all of them what the relationship between these features were. Some grave locations indicate that they were dug alongside the wall, and there is the possibility that several graves existed while the building was in use. We just can't rule it out. At the moment we don't know what the relationship is between this wall and the graves. I'll show you later on in the section drawing that it's not anything to do with the chapel as far as we can tell. But perhaps, well not perhaps, definitely, the most exciting discovery was this. This is a cross-shaped, you can see roughly cross-shaped there and coming up at the top, and cross-incised, it isn't runes, it's a grave marker found at the head of grave 26, which is this absolutely beautifully preserved adult female. I think it's a Latin linear ring cross. People were saying, oh, we've got runes, and I don't think it is. I think there was a cross, and that because it's a slaty stone, it's fragmented across, like when you cut a tile and you incise and then it breaks at that point. I think that since it was placed in the ground, it fragmented off at the point where the cross arm went across here, and that this is an attempt at a circle forming a Latin linear ring cross. And if it is, then as far as I can tell, and I said this when we were on the site, but I think, and Heather probably can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the first in situ overtly Christian grave marker that's ever been found in Wales, possibly in, I'm going to say possibly in Britain, but there may be Anglo-Saxon Christian grave markers at a slightly later date. But this is terrifically important. We haven't got a burial that is marked in this way that says this person was definitely a Christian. This is the first one. We've got burials at later church sites where the site has been an early cemetery of this date, and then later on a church or chapel has been built at the site, but we've never had anything like this before, and it's terrifically exciting. And it wasn't the only one we found. This is one that Pete found on the beach on the first day. He was just walking along the beach, and he has the devil spotted it, picked it up, and it's this one. Again, it's been shaped into a cross shape, and although you can't see it here, there is a cross incised on it, although it doesn't have the ring, but it does have this. If I go back to the previous slide, you can see it's just there on the stone, and it's a bit fuzzy, but this is it close up. Now, I haven't got a clue what this is. If anybody has got any idea, seen anything like this before, this geometric pattern, I don't think that's geological. It looks to me like it's deliberately placed there, I may be wrong, but if anyone's got any idea what that might be, then please get in touch with us, because it's incredibly interesting. So the skeleton in grave 26 is one of the ones that we're sending for carbon dating. The skeleton that was found, this one in the grave here with the marker. And I'm going to be really interested to see what dates we get back from that, because these are all examples of, these are not individual grave markers. Well, they may be, but they're not actually, we haven't actually found them at the head of graves. These are all Latin linear ring crosses from other monuments in Dyfed, elsewhere in Dyfed. This one is from St Non's Chapel. It's leaning up inside the chapel walls. That's Castle of Royce, Abergwili. This is St Elvis's farm, St Elvis. That one is St Kennox's farm, Llanhaddon, and that's Llanuna farm and Llanunda. And these are all Latin linear ring crosses, which Nancy Edwards, who's written the corpus of inscribed, early medieval inscribed stones for the whole of Wales, and she's dated all these, and I think the dating goes back to Nash Williams, doesn't it, for this type of ring cross, to the 7th or 8th century. So based on that, I'd sort of stick my neck out and say that I think that if we've got a rough attempt at a Latin linear ring cross on a grave marker, then perhaps it dates that burial to the 7th or 8th century. And if the dates come back as being earlier, then that just pushes us back. I think the earliest example of the Latin linear ring cross anywhere is in Roman Mausolea of about 500 AD. So it's going to be terrifically interesting to get the dates back from that burial. And that that brings the discussion of the burials to a close, really. But there's a bit more to say about the development of the site. Sand continued to accumulate over the burials and there may have been a period during which the site wasn't used for burial. The chapel itself was constructed on wind-blown sand, and you can see this is the chapel wall, that's the base of the chapel wall, this is the top of the burials. These infant graves up here are some of the later burials on the site, but you can see they're still below the
big round of